Hi guys, in this episode I'm going to show you how to finally bring our geometric square blanket together. In previous episodes I've shown you how to make the square berry square, the diamond treble square, the hexagon bubble square, and the triangle puff square. So today I'm going to show you how to use this very pretty slip stitch join here. And how to join all your squares together, and then also how to finish off your blanket by creating this very pretty single crochet border with a very nice detail here at the end using the crab stitch. So let's get started. So let's start first by creating that border on our crochet square. Here I have the berry square, which we know is made up of 31 stitches, which is the same for all the squares. So we're going to be putting one single crochet on each of these stitches. But when you look at the rows, this square has 33 rows, and the diamond and the hexagon actually have 35, and the triangle has 37. So for the berry square, what we will need to do is to put 2 extra single crochets on each of the sides here, on each of the rows, to make up 35 stitches. And for the triangle puff, it will actually skip 2 rows, usually one at the beginning and one at the start from the 2 sides, again, so that we have 35 single crochets on each of the sides. And this will just help the assembly of the squares when we start joining them together. So to start with the border, you will need your square, your yarn, and here I have paper white paint box DK acrylic, which is what I've used for the entirety of the project, and my number 4mm crochet hook, and of course you'll need a pair of scissors and eventually a darning needle to weave in your ends. So to start, we'll make a little loop here for our crochet hook, and you can really start in whichever place you like. My preference is not to start on a corner because I like the stitches on the corner to be quite robust, so I don't want them to be close to an end. And this again is just a little trick to help you then when you start joining the squares. So let's start, let's say, from here. So I'm just going to put my yarn like this, yarn over, bring this through and sort of slip stitch, and now we'll do a proper single crochet here. So I've put my hook through the stitch, yarn over and pull through, yarn over and pull through. And what I also try and do is I try and catch that extra bit of yarn from my loop as I do my single crochets. Again, this just helps me not have to weave in that many ends in the end. So here I'll continue just going on the previous stitches by placing single crochet stitches. And the other thing you would like to make sure is that when you're placing or making this border is that you keep your crochet squares facing the same side, so that you don't, for example, start your border with one crochet square facing up with the right side up, and then you start another one on the other side, because as you can see, it might be a different effect. However, you can pick and choose whichever way you do. I quite like the little ridges of the stitches showing up. I find that it gives it a bit of a stitched look. So you'll just continue doing this, and when you reach the corner, I will show you how many crochet stitches to place. So pause the video, work up till your first corner just before that, and I'll show you what to do at that point. So now I've reached almost the end of this first side, and I have my last remaining stitch here. So because this is a corner, I need to place 2 single crochets, which I'll do like this, 1 single crochet, and in the same space a single crochet, a second single crochet, and it should look a bit like this. Now, normally what I would then do is I would place a single crochet on each of the rows, and that would give me 33 single crochets. But because we need one extra one, in this next gap here, I will place 2 single crochets for this particular square. For the diamond and the hexagon one, you can just place 1 single crochet per row, and for the puff one, you actually need to place 2 less. But I'll have the written instructions for all of that on my blog post if you want to have a closer look. But for the purposes of this square, I've added my my corner single crochet, and then I've made 2 single crochets in that first spot. So I'll continue placing 1 single crochet in each of these rows. In my experience, there's no hard rule about how to go about doing that, because these are the sides, so they're not proper crochet stitches that you're working into. So just count and try and put 1 single crochet on each of the rows. And you'll see if you just maintain the right amount of numbers, or a consistent amount of numbers across your pieces, they will come out very nice and very evenly. You may find if you're using a different kind of yarn to what I'm using, or if your tension is too tight, that you may need to put a few extra stitches. That is fine. Again, as long as you have the same number of stitches across the sides of all your squares, that's what's the most important thing in terms of helping you then join them up in the correct way. And also what you want to make sure is that as you place those single crochet stitches, that you don't bunch up your piece. You want it to be lying flat and nice. Of course, I haven't blocked this one yet, so it curls a bit, but you should make sure that it doesn't distort your shape that you worked so hard to achieve in the first place. So I will continue placing single crochets along my piece here. And really all that I'm doing is I'm slightly stretching my piece and looking at what gaps I can put my hook into. And usually you'll find that there is one such gap on each row. So that's a helpful guide, I find, especially when you're working on rows of single crochet. I think that helps a lot. So here I am towards the end of my side here. Right. So I have one more here, and so in this one, which is my penultimate spot, or a spot before I reach my corner, I should place 2 single crochets like so. And if I turn my piece here, I will place my first and then my second single crochet in that same first spot. That essentially starts creating the corner for my other side. And if you count here, you should have 35 stitches or 35 single crochets. And now what we'll do is we'll continue by placing 1 single crochet on each stitch. This is the side where we created our chains, so just make sure that you're picking up the right loops, and I'll show you a couple for how to do it. And then you'll repeat the same. You're going to put 2 single crochets in that last space, that last chain space if you like, original chain space. And then you're going to start working your 4th side by putting 2 single crochets in the first row space, and continue putting 1 single crochet across the rest of your rows, and finishing up with 2 single crochets in that last row space, and starting your last little bit here with 2 single crochets in that first stitch, and then you can finish up your piece here. So what I'll do is I'll show you a bit how you can place your single crochets on this chain, or the work chains if you like, from your piece. And if you turn your piece, you can sort of see your chains here. So just go carefully and just identify the right chains and just work into them. And again, just make sure that you're counting. You should have 31 stitches on this row, or rather this row, I suppose. And just take it slow, count and double count, and as long as you have a consistent number of single crochets, like I said before, and your shape isn't distorted, you'll be perfect for joining. This will be the perfect way for joining your crochet squares. So I'll go ahead, finish up this bit, and meet you once up here to show you how we finish up the border. And again, if you prefer to make a thicker border with further single crochets going around your piece, you can do it. It will definitely bulk up your blanket as well. So I'll meet you in a sec to show you how we finish up this square border. So here I am. I've worked across my piece. I've done my little corner crochet, the two single crochets in the same spot. And now I will finish up by placing the last few single crochets in those empty spaces. And here what I'll do is I'll go to my first single crochet and slip stitch through it like so. Chain one, take a pair of scissors, give myself a bit of yarn to weave that in and pull through. And really that is your finished piece. And now you are ready to join this with the rest of your crochet squares. So once you've completed the border across all of your crochet squares, you're ready to start joining them. And the method that I'm going to be showing you today is this slip stitch method, which creates a lovely little braid on top of your piece, and it's also very flat. And I think this is a nice subtle look, given that we have a lot of color in our blanket and a lot of texture with all the shapes that is going on. So the first thing is lay out all your squares on a flat surface on the floor to make sure that you are happy with the placement, the colors, the shapes. You can choose whatever way you like, whether you want maybe all colors in one row or one column, or the same for the shapes. I have left a little visual guide for how I laid out my own blanket, as I wanted a very specific pattern and a nice distribution of the colors, so you can have a look at that on my blog. But once you're happy with the placement of your squares, you should start connecting the squares by looking at the different columns. So this is what I've done here. And then once you've done all your columns, you can start connecting them in terms of the rows. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to connect the last remaining square. And I'm going to start by this last piece here. This little square goes here. And I will show you how to connect it first in this way, and then how we work the join here, which is the most important thing to get right. The first thing when you start joining your squares is that the yarn that you're working with needs to be underneath both squares. Now, you may also want to use stitch markers. Ignore this piece of yarn, it's for connecting the row afterwards that I'm going to show you. But you may want to make sure that you use stitch markers at the beginning or the end, probably at the end here, to make sure that you've counted the right amount of stitches that you need to work into. I don't need to do that because it's my last piece and I've done enough of them now to be able to recognize the right stitches, but that may be something you want to do if you're just starting. And again, it's important that you keep your stitch count accurate to make sure that your blanket comes out looking good. So if you're starting from the very beginning, at the very beginning of your row, all you'll need to do, or your column indeed, which is what you should be starting with, is make a slip knot on your hook. And then take your two pieces. And the first thing we will do is you'll take your hook, you'll go to your corner piece, and you're going to pick up with your hook the front loop of this piece, like so. And with that working yarn on the bottom, just leave it like this. You're going to go to your corner piece on this other piece here and pick up the back loop like this. And then you're going to go and pick up your working yarn, which is here at the very end, yarn over and pull through like this. And that's all there is to this join. Again, pick up the front loop and pick up the back loop, and remember your yarn should be underneath your hook, and then you bring it up and you go through them with your hook. You can go one by one if you're afraid of catching anything. And you'll continue in this way until you have finished with your side. It's really a very easy stitch. It's just a bit fiddly in terms of how you hold the yarn and how you hold the pieces together. However, I have found that it's very easy to also do it on the couch. You just lay the piece that you're working on a flat, semi-rigid cushion, and it's beautiful. So let me stop here to show you a bit how it looks. So you can see here you create a nice beautiful braid. And it's a very flat, easy join, very discreet, perfect for this blanket, I think, where you want the attention to be on the shapes and the colors. And all you're going to do is continue along this way, picking up your stitches, the equivalent ones from both sides. And again, if you find that you've missed a stitch, or that maybe you have more stitches on one side rather than the other, just try and even it out. So for example, let's say I had an extra stitch on this side, then what I would do is I would pick up my loop from this side, my front loop, and my back loop from this. And then I would simply go, under that same loop and pick up the next one from here. Again, if this has happened on a couple of places in your piece, you have so many pieces to crochet together, it can happen. But don't worry, there's always a solution, and I find that this works really well, and you're not really going to be able to see the little mistake, the little error in counting at the end once your blanket is finished. So I'll go ahead, I'll crochet all along, I'll slip stitch all along to create this border, and then I'll meet you back here so that we can have a look at this piece of yarn and how we join our rows and what happens here when these 4 crochet squares meet. So you can see here I've completed my little piece, and then when I was at the very last part of the join, I simply did a chain 1 and snipped my yarn off and pulled it through. And so I'm now ready to crochet the rows, and you do that in exactly the same way as you do the columns, but the trick is how to do this join here. So I also wanted to show you what happens when you've reached these trickier parts where you have a join here on your columns, and which means that it's harder for you to play around with this piece of yarn. What I like to do in those cases is keep this, get myself some yarn that I can play with, keep this around my finger, but then make sure with my thumb that it's underneath my piece so I don't get confused. So again, you can go like this with your front loop on the one side and your back loop in this, and then tighten with your finger and your thumb this piece here so that you can pull it through. And it does get a bit trickier as you come closer to this edge here, but it is very much doable, and you can get used to it the more you do it. So again, we've picked up the front loop from this piece and the back loop from this piece, yarn over and pull through, and you can make sure that you guide your hook. And once you've reached this part here, what I like to do is take the yarn, the working yarn, and tug it. And it's probably not visible from the camera, but I can look at this space here and put my hook there so that I can see what I'm doing. So let me show you, because it's probably easier to show you than explain with words. Pick up your yarn, your front loop, and then pick up your back loop. And then poke your hook through this side so that you can see what you're doing. And once you've yarned over, bring it on this side. And there you have it. So these are just some little tips and tricks that I picked up while I had to do all of these, to connect all of these little squares. So here I'm going to do my last slip stitch join before I reach the corner. And here I am, I've basically reached the corner. And what I'll do now is I'll go to these two pieces here. And actually the first thing I want to do is I want to work on the last stitch from this column. And what I will do is I will find that last stitch, and usually you can see it because it's slightly elongated here. And it's usually that piece. And what I'll do is I'll go to the front loop of that on the one piece here. Make sure you catch it all. Sorry, my yarn is splitting a bit here. But there, you caught it, catch it all. And then do the same with the front loop here. Yep, make sure you're in the right spot, like this. Yarn over and pull through. And the trick here is not to make this too tight. You don't want this loop here to bunch up your piece. So give it some slack, not too much, but give it some. And then we start picking up our loops in the same way as we did before. So front loop, again, keeping your yarn in the back. Back loop, yarn over, slip stitch. And I'll make a few more here so that you can see how this will look. Let's do a couple more. And you do get into a rhythm. And this is how it looks. I'll try and see if... So you see you end up, let me get my hook, you end up with two little loops over this original join, like this. And just keep your tension right, and you'll see that it will give you a very consistent look across your piece. So once you've done your join here, what I will do, and what you should do, is I'll continue crocheting and slip stitching those two last pieces together. And once I reach the end, I will do my last slip stitch, chain one, and snip off my yarn and pull through the yarn and secure my piece. So go ahead, do that with all your columns and all your rows of crochet squares, and I'll meet you back so that we can start working on the border. So once you've joined all your squares, we will start working on the border. And you don't necessarily need to weave in your ends. I'll show you a little trick that I do to hide those behind your border. So for the purposes of this video, I will show you how to make this border in these using these two squares, but of course you'll be doing a much larger job by creating a border for your entire blanket. What I will show you specifically is how to start your border, what to do when you come in this join here, and also what to do in the corners. Now, one of the things that I want to make sure happens in the case of my blanket is that I want to maintain this texture here of the crochet around the border. And if you were to make a border that went in the round, you would end up with a slightly different texture, a more thin border. And I'll try and superimpose a picture of another blanket, which I did by working the border kind of in the round. Instead, what I want for this blanket is for the border to have this thick consistency, just like in the squares. So what I will do is I will actually start my border, work across all the sides, and when I reach the last stitch, I'll actually connect the two sides, slip stitch into my first stitch, and start working actually on the other side. The other thing that I will do for the purposes of this border is I will actually flip my piece. So I'll be effectively working in the back, or starting from the back of my square, and that's again to build up that richer texture because of the way we crocheted this border here. So to start off, I'll make a loop, a slip knot here for my hook, and get that through here. And I'll just place my hook in one of the stitches. Doesn't really matter where, you can go closer to the corner, but here just so that I can show you more easily the joint, I'm starting here. So place your hook through one of the stitches, yarn over, pull through, and do a little slip stitch, and that will secure our yarn. And you can bring this piece of yarn on the inside at the end. And then I'll do a single crochet in that same stitch, like this. And I will continue doing a single crochet, placing one single crochet in each of these stitches. It's now quite easy because we did all the hard work before by creating a nice row of single crochet around our squares, and also when we join them. So that's actually fairly straightforward. Now here I've reached this join, and you can sort of flip your piece to see. Now this top stitch, this elongated stitch slightly, is still part of my top, even though it looks a bit squished. And then I can see from how my piece was finished last time, you can see where the stitches are that it's pulling from. So this stitch and this stitch. So I know that to create my border, I need to go into this stitch to do a single crochet, figure out what happens here in the middle, and then pick up here again. So what I like to do is in this last stitch before the join, I like to place 2 single crochets, and then I'll put my hook through this join that I've created. Depending on how tightly you finished off your piece, this might be easier or slightly harder, but I'll place my hook through here and I'll do 2 single crochets, and then I'll do another 2 in this first stitch after the join. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So 2 single crochets in one stitch, and then flip your piece around to identify that last braid. You can see it's our join here is like little braids, little V's. So you want to place your hook in that last V. You can use your nails and your finger like this, and just place a normal single crochet like this. So once you've done that first single crochet, then flip your piece around and go from the other side, go in to that same braid space and do another single crochet. And effectively the first time you put a single crochet in that braid bit, in that little V, you did it from the right to the left, and for the second one you did it from the left to the right, and that just gives it a nicer look. But of course, if you're finding that maneuver slightly tricky, just go ahead and do it like you did the first one. So now we are ready to place 2 single crochets in this stitch here, which is the first from our next square. And you can see here, if I flip my piece, that by adding all these extra stitches, we really covered up this area that was slightly sparse before. And of course, we're not going to keep all those stitches in our next row for the border, but I'll show you what to do to that when we get to it. So for the remainder of your blanket, until you reach your next join, or indeed you reach a corner, we will just single crochet across our piece, and that should be fairly straightforward and easy. You can make as many rows of this border as you like. I have made 4 rows of this. In the first one, like I'm showing you here, I created the single crochets needed to get the joins to be flat and sort of looking full. And then in the second row, I decreased some of those stitches in those joins to make sure that my border is built up quite nicely. And then for the third and the fourth row, I simply did single crochets while paying attention to what happens to the corners, so that those also increase alongside our border in a nice way, making sure that our piece is sort of lying flat and is not curling up. So hopefully at some point you will have also reached the corner here. So I will continue to single crochet up until my corner. And depending on how you joined your squares, or depending on which square ends up at the edge, if you like, you may have a very straightforward stitch that is your corner, but it doesn't really matter as long as you pick a stitch that is close to the corner. This one is the best one in my case, but it may not be so for all of the other corners, but one that is close enough to the corner or on the corner, where what we will do is we will place 3 single crochets, like so. And this will just make sure that we have a nice little border. If I flip my piece here on the other side, and on every subsequent row you will pick that middle stitch and you'll place 3 single crochets in that middle stitch. And one easy way of making sure you don't get confused is putting in a stitch marker. Here I don't have any, but I have some extra yarn, so I'm just gonna put a little string of yarn in here. I'm actually going to make a bit of a knot because when I was doing my blanket, it was so big that actually those little pieces of yarn, when you don't use stitch markers, those pieces of yarns actually come off. So in case you're doing the same as me, make sure you put a little knot so that you can easily take them out, but that they're securely on your piece. And then after I finished my corner, I'm just going to single crochet across my piece. Whenever I find a join, I will place 2 stitches or 2 single crochets in the last stitch of my corner, and then place 2 single crochets on that last slip stitch join, a little braid V on the front piece of our work, and then do another 2 single crochets in the next stitch, in the next single crochet space of my square, and always 3 single crochets in that corner stitch for each of my corners. So I will go ahead, crochet around my piece here, and meet you back at the very beginning so that I can show you how I join this round and how I start my second row. And just before we actually go to the end of our piece, I remember that I promised to show you a little trick for how to hide these ends here. So here I'm at this join again. I've put 2 single crochets in the last stitch of my square, put 2 single crochets in that braid bit, and now I'm ready to start single crocheting into my square. And I have this yarn here, this little piece of yarn, which is from when I joined the 2 squares. So what I can do is I can either weave it in, or if I'm feeling a bit more lazy, which I often am, I'm just gonna hide it here, put it across my stitches in the front, and here as I put 2 single crochet stitches in that stitch of my square, I'm just gonna hide it in those stitches. Just keep it in the back. It's white against white, so it's not going to show, but keep it towards the back of your work, and you can see that it just gets worked into your piece, and it's just one less end to worry about. So here I'm almost ready to complete my first row of my border. You'll recall I had this little end at the beginning that was facing my good side, my right side, so I'm just going to use my hook and bring that in the back, and I can weave that in. And here I have 3 single crochets left, so I will place my 3 single crochets. So now I will find my first single crochet stitch, which is this guy here. Go under both loops, like so, and then yarn over, pull through, and pull through to make a slip stitch. And then I will chain 1 and turn my piece. And then what I will do is I will continue doing a single crochet stitch on the other direction. And if you want, you can always put a marker here to make sure that you know that this is your first stitch from that previous row. I don't really need it, but if you'd like to, and that would help you, please go ahead and do that. And this is now our second row of our border. So as I said, I have done 4 rows in my own border, and it is on this second row that I actually work some decreases, and I do that at the joins of the squares, and that's because we added all these extra single crochets to make it nice and full, but we don't need those now. We've made our piece look good already. So here I just want to really quickly show you what we do in the corner. As I mentioned before, I have put 3 single crochet stitches in those corner pieces and marked the middle one with a marker, some scrap of yarn in my case. And what I will do now is when I come to this stitch, I will again place 3 single crochets, and that just make sure that our corner is looking nice as our border becomes larger. So here I am. I'm about to single crochet into my middle stitch, so I'm just going to untangle this piece of yarn and place 1, 2, 3 single crochets. And you can see how nicely it is building up. No gaps, no nothing. And what I'll do again is I'll place my little stitch marker or piece of yarn again in that middle stitch so I don't get confused on the way back. So I'll continue along this way, add 3 single crochets in the middle stitch here, and then I'll meet you when I'm back at this join to tell you how we work our decreases. So now we've reached the join area again, and you'll recall in our previous row we worked a number of increases. Now we need to decrease those increases now, otherwise our border will have a bit of a fan effect here, and we don't want that. We want it to be nice and straight. So we will work 2 decreases. So you'll recall that the additional stitches that we placed, if I can flip this around, were 2 stitches coming from our last single crochet on our square, on our orange square, and then we made 2 stitches in that join, and then another 2 stitches in the first stitch or the last stitch, depending on how you stitch this, of our square. So what we will do is we'll place 1 single crochet in that increase, but then in the increase, so the second single crochet from our square and the first single crochet that we did from our braid, we will decrease that, and we will then work a second decrease for that second single crochet from that join, and with the first single crochet from that piece here. So let me show you what I mean. You'll come to your square here and you will have 2 stitches left before the join. You'll single crochet into that stitch like so, and then you will work 2 decreases. So for the first one, place your hook inside through your stitch, yarn over and pull through, and then place your hook through that next stitch, yarn over and pull through, and then yarn over and pull through the 3 loops. And then you'll do the same. And in fact, in my case, I'll be catching the yarn from behind as well, so that I don't have to weave it in at the end. But you see I've gone through 2 stitches, yarn over and pull my yarn through, which gives me 3 loops, and then a yarn over and I pull through all. And I've worked 2 single crochet decreases, and for that point on I will just continue doing single crochet. And again, as I said, in my case I'm taking that little end piece and weaving it in, so I don't have to do that afterwards with a darning needle. And here I have now arrived at the end of my row, and you can see that both our edges are looking straight and our corners are looking good as well. So to finish this row, we'll check, we have maybe 1 more single crochet to do here. And then we will find our first stitch and slip stitch into it like so. Chain 1, turn our piece around, and now you are ready to continue doing single crochets for that 3rd row. And I will just do this for a few more moments so that I can show you how the join looks once you've actually put that 3rd row. As a reminder, I'm doing 4 rows, so after I've completed this row I'll do 1 remaining row of single crochets, and then I will actually put the final touch on my border, which is the crab stitch. So I've just gone over my border here, and I'll just crochet a bit further into my square. Again, the only thing I'm doing in this row is placing single crochets on top of my stitches, and I will work my increases in the corner as we've discussed before. But if I stop here and I flip my piece around, you can see how nice the border is looking. There's no gaps, there's nothing that seems out of order. And once you put your 4th row, it will look even nicer. And I will go ahead and do this for this piece so that I can show you how we add the crab stitch in the end. But just before that, I want to show you how the actual blanket looks as well, with the 4 rows of single crochet. So this is it. And you can see how seamless the joins are. Just need to pull this up on my desk here so you can see a bit better. And the corners as well. So I'll go ahead, I'll finish my 3rd row and then do a 4th row, and I'll meet you right at the end of that 4th row so that I can show you how I finish off my rows of single crochet and how I start on this crab stitch, the reverse single crochet stitch as it's otherwise known. So see you in a bit. So I've now done my 4 rows of single crochet, and you can see how my piece is looking and the corners. And this is what your blanket should be looking at this point. And now we are ready to finish this row by placing the last remaining single crochet stitch and then slip stitching into that first stitch. And then we will chain 1, and that means we're ready to start with our crab stitch. And the crab stitch is kind of the final touch in this border, just to give a nice edge here to your blanket. You can, of course, if you like this finish, you can of course keep it this way. It will still look lovely, but I think that a slight edge and the slight sort of ripple effect, if you like, that the crab stitch gives, it works really nice in this blanket. So your crab stitch is essentially a reverse single crochet. So take your hook and go downwards, pull it down, and go through that last stitch like this. Then yarn over, pull through, just like you would do for a normal single crochet. You will have 2 loops on your hook, and then yarn over and pull through. And then you'll do that in the stitch that comes before it. So like this, and yarn over. Let's do it a third time. Take your hook, and sometimes it's helpful if you hold your yarn back with your finger here, just so that you get it through that stitch easily. You yarn over, you pull your hook through that stitch, and you yarn over and pull through both of these loops. So you see, you end up with this very delicate ripple effect design at the very end, which I think complements this blanket really well, because it has very bright colors and quite a distinct sort of pattern design. And this is a nice way to finish off the blanket. And the other good thing is that you don't actually need to count your stitches. You don't need to have a specific number of stitches on your border to make this work. Just place one of these reverse single crochet stitches into each stitch, basically. So once you've done that, once you've done this beautiful stitch all around your blanket, you'll end up back here, and what you will do is you will simply do a crab stitch in your last stitch, and then you'll go into the same stitch where you placed your crab stitch, and you will just do a small slip stitch, chain 1, and fasten off your yarn. And that's really it. Once you've finished with your crab stitch here in the edge, you can either go ahead and block your blanket, which is a nice finishing touch, or you might as well weave in your ends and go ahead and use it. So I hope you've enjoyed these series of blogs and video tutorials. I will link all the previous blogs and YouTube videos showing you how to make the different patterns in the description box below. And I do really hope that you give this a try, whether it is for making a blanket or to use some of these techniques for another project. And as always, happy crochet!